Rai, uh, and it gives me great pleasure that today the attendees are also looking forward to hear you. I also welcome Nidhi Katti, the Vice President of History Enthusiast Group. And Nidhi, may I request you now to introduce the today's speaker?
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, sir. I also take this opportunity to introduce our honorary president, Nandan Shastri ji. He actually had a commitment today, but in that busy schedule, sir has given us time and he has joined. And also, I take this opportunity to welcome Miss Banali Momaya. Due to some work, she is not able to join us today. So it's a privilege to introduce our today's resource person, Saurav ji. Uh, his full name is Saurav Kumar Rai. He is research officer at Gandhi Smriti and Darshan Samiti, New Delhi. So, sir completed his BA History honors from University of Delhi and MA History Modern India from same University of Delhi, and MPhil History from University of Delhi, and also PhD History from, of course, University of Delhi. The title of his thesis was Ayurveda, Nation and Society, United Province, 1890 to 1950. The same title on which today sir is going to talk. Later on, he converted his thesis into a book, which is also available on Amazon. Interested ones can order it. He has been the recipient of many awards. To mention some of them are a recipient of Deep Chandra Memorial Prize for securing first position in the University of Delhi in BA Honours History in the year 2006 to 2009, topper of Modern Indian History batch in MA History 2009 to 2011. He was awarded the University Grant Commission's Junior and Senior Research Fellowship June 2012 for pursuing MPhil and later on his PhD. He also qualified his UGC NET exam in June 2012. Um, so his major book publications are Ayurveda, Nation and Society, United Province, 1890 to 1950. Orient Black Swan, Hyderabad, has published it in 2024. And one more, his book is Debating Modern Indian History, Manak publication, New Delhi, 2021. It was published in. Both the books are available in Amazon. You can get it there. He has published many research papers in national, international conferences, and both in English and Hindi. And he has also written many articles in newspapers and in magazine columns too. Some to mention in them is Pandemics Through Indian Literary Lens in Live History India. It was published in July 2020. And How the Epidemic Diseases Act of 1897 came to be is one more his article which he wrote in 2020, discussing the silence Mahatma Gandhi and Congress on Bhagat Singh's martyrdom in mainstream weekly are some of them to be mentioned. Um, he has a very elaborate biodata. We will surely post it in our groups to the interested audience who want to read it out. So now I request our resource person to take the stage and start his lecture. Over to you, sir.
Thanks, Nidhi, and Thanks. I would like to extend my heartfelt thank to the history enthusiast and Honorary President Sri Nandan Shastri ji. And it's a great opportunity for me to discuss a book which is actually very dear to me. Uh, this is the book, as Nidhi introduced, emerged out of my PhD thesis. I would like to begin the discussion by invoking one very prominent book by the legendary French philosopher and thinker Michel Foucault. Michel Foucault had he had a very interesting work titled as The Birth of Clinic, where he talked about two major epistemological shifts marked by the development of the idea of medical gaze, and second was the shift in the utility of medicine, and he talked it in the context of Western medicine. So he's what he argued that in 19th century, Western medicine underwent two significant changes. One was, as I said, the emergence of medical gaze, which was actually the separation of body from soul. So, a kind of biological reductionism of body took place during this time in the epistemology of Western medicine. And secondly, there was shift in the utility of medicine marked by a spontaneous and deeply rooted convergence between the requirements of political ideology and those of medical technology. So, the second shift which he talked about was actually it implied coming together of the state and the utility of medicine. So, how medicine slowly became part of what he termed as governmentality. So he talked about these two major shifts, and based on that, various historians over the course of time worked on how modern medicine emerged as an important tool of governance or power regimes. Then historians like David Arnold or Mark Harrison, they replicated this model in the colonial setting by looking at the relationship between Western medicine and its involvement in colonial expansion. So they actually looked through the socio-political manifestations of Western medicine, the way it unfolded in the colonial setup. Now, what interested me is to look at that whether similar kinds of shift also took place in the field of indigenous, what we call quote unquote indigenous healing systems, by which we basically imply systems like Ayurveda or Unani or Yoga or Siddha. So, whether similar kinds of shift were there, because so in a way I was trying to look at the socio-political manifestations or socio-political context of development of Ayurveda and Unani in 19th and 20th century, that is with the colonial modernity. Now, uh, we must remember that with the by the late 19th and early 20th century, with growing dominance of Western medicine in colonial setup, an entire movement had come up to revive indigenous healing systems. And that was quite natural, because indigeneity suddenly became a fascinating idea, or indigeneity became a basic idea around which the national movement gathered its mass. So I began by discussing the historical backdrop in which this entire movement to revive indigenous healing systems like Ayurveda and Unani took place. So, two things: why late 19th century, to be very precise, why in 1890s this medical revivalism started a kind of takeoff point can be considered 1890s can be considered as a takeoff point for medical revivalism in India, both in the case of Ayurveda and also Unani. Then why? After what was so significant about 1890s? Then we need to here we need to look at two particular contexts. One was the plague epidemic, which took place in mid 1890s. We just passed through a major pandemic, COVID. But before COVID, also there were various pandemics which took place in the Indian subcontinent and also world over. And plague was one such pandemic which has been heavily worked upon and heavily documented. So in mid 1890s, there was an outbreak of plague epidemic, bubonic plague epidemic, and that actually brought the entire Western healing system, or entire colonial public health system based on Western medicine, to its knees, because now the colonial government in the initial years of the outbreak of plague epidemic was actually clueless that how to curtail this epidemic. And that actually provided a golden opportunity for practitioners of indigenous medicine like Ayurveda or Unani to push forward the case of the respective cases of their healing systems, or to prove the efficacy of their healing systems. And so that provided a context, that plague epidemic. Then the second was, of course, that we all know that 1890s was the period when we see the emergence of nationalist movement in India. 1885, Indian National Congress was set up, and then gradually, slowly and gradually, this movement started picking up, beginning from various facets of nationalist construction. However, it was never a homogeneous movement. This movement to revive indigenous medicine was never a homogeneous movement, because there were two fundamental questions which the practitioners and proponents of indigenous medicine had to resolve on an urgent basis. First was, which system represented the indigenous healing system of India? So here we need to remember that the situation of India was a tricky one. India traditionally was an abode and has been an abode of various healing systems, right? Beginning from Ayurveda to Unani to Yoga or Siddha or various other healing practices which do not fall exactly under particular system, but they are also practiced from region to region. So now, which system was actually could be deemed as the indigenous healing systems of India was an important question to resolve. Then the second was that even if you talk about a particular system, such as, for example, if you say that Ayurveda is indigenous healing systems, then even Ayurveda was never a homogeneous system as such. Before the 20th century, or before the beginning of 20th century, a lot of fluidity was there, and multiple practices were there which were in vogue in the name of Ayurveda. So what sort of practices, knowledge, or healers precisely constitute that particular indigenous healing system was also a tricky question to solve. So the entire scene was quite complex. So with these questions, also when the medical revivalism was going on, then as I said, that national movement had provided one major context for this medical revivalism. So there was an attempt to nationalize Ayurveda at the same time. And so there was attempt to link the revivalism of Ayurveda with the nationalist nationalist construction of indigeneity, or with nationalist movement. So you see, by mid 20th century, this effort to nationalize Ayurveda reached to a point where tricolor was drawn for Ayurveda. So there was an Ayurvedic flag which was designed on the pattern of Indian tricolor. Or there was also an Ayurvedic anthem the lyrics of which were tuned after one very famous patriotic song of the time, this Vijay Vishwa Tiranga Pyara, which was quite popular patriotic song of that time. So Ayurvedic anthem was also tuned on that nationalist poem. So there was an effort to nationalize Ayurveda along with its revival. Now, another important facet to look was that what was the response of the colonial government? One can imagine, or one can anticipate that colonial government was not very happy with this entire effort to revive indigenous healing practices, because colonial government always felt that these indigenous healing systems are not the scientific healing systems. But at the same time, colonial government never completely denied the claims of Ayurveda or even Unani, because if you see the data of the time, then 84% of the population was still resorting to indigenous medicine. So, in short, the late colonial revival, reconstruction of Ayurveda as indigenous national medicine, was not merely a medical phenomena. Rather, as I discussed, that it was grossly a socio-political process as well. Now, if you move further, if the medical revivalism or Ayurvedic revivalism was a socio-political phenomena, then it will be interesting to look at the opinion of Indian National Congress regarding Ayurveda and its revival. In fact, issue of medicine appeared in various sessions of Congress continuously. Initially, the issue was regarding Indianization of Indian medical service. Initially, what happened that there was one major colonial service, this which was Pan Indian service, Indian medical service. In fact, civil surgeons used to be recruited out of the rank and file of this Indian medical service. Yeah. So there was a demand to Indianize the rank and files of Indian medical service. Besides that, people like Hakim Ajmal Khan, who was very prominently associated with Indian National Congress and also with All India Muslim League, he argued in favor of not just Indianization of Indian medical service, but the complete overhauling of healing practices. And that's where he started talking about that we just need not to uh, push for the demand for Indianization of IMS, or that is Indian Medical Service, but also at the same time, we also need to revive our indigenous healing systems like Ayurveda and Unani. In fact, in one of his speeches, he categorically stated that if we want to take the administration of government into our own hands, we must write all national things, including the indigenous method of healing. Our real progress depends on these things. We fail in serving our country if we are dependent on outside things. Similarly, uh, if you look at the ideas of Mahatma Gandhi, then between 1920 and 40, if you browse through the collected works of Mahatma Gandhi, then he wrote a lot related to the questions of health and healing system or preferred healing system. uh, Gandhi, with his idea of Swadeshi, in a way, he championed the cause of Swadeshi, but at the same time, this did not restrict him from looking at the weaknesses of indigenous healing systems at the same time. So initially, he began favoring the healing practices like Ayurveda, but very soon he realized that the kind of the soul or the spirit of inquiry, which actually ignites the profession of Western medicine, is missing in the case of Ayurveda. And gradually he turned into an internal critique of Ayurveda. So he was not denying Ayurveda and its efficacy, but continuously from various forums, he was reminding the Veds and Ayurvedic practitioners to carry themselves with this spirit of inquiry. And also, one major concern in the case of Mahatma Gandhi was that it should be cheap enough or cost effective enough that it could reach to the masses. So he had two major concerns. First, that it has to be effective, because health was not simply a question of ideology. it was a pragmatic thing. If someone is dying, then the healing system has to be efficacious enough to heal that person. So efficacy was one major concern for Mahatma Gandhi while propagating the cause of Ayurveda, and also the cost effectiveness. Secondly, in as I worked in with the specific focus on United Provinces, there the ideas of Govind Ballabh Pant also became important when we talk about the attitude of Indian National Congress towards the late colonial Ayurvedic movement. Why? Because Govind Ballabh Pant headed a Congress ministry which came into United Provinces in 1937 out of Government of India Act 1935, and he was the Prime Minister. The Chief Minister used to be deemed as Prime Minister during those days. So he was the Prime Minister of United Provinces. And if you look at the writings of Govind Ballabh Pant, then he appeared quite a pragmatist person in this scene. So he opted for he advocated for Ayurveda and Unani because he believed that if you want to expand the health facilities, then the amount of money which is required was not actually at the disposal of the state government or provincial government, and that's where he favored Ayurveda and Unani, because he believed that it will be a cost effective mechanism to expand the health facilities by favoring indigenous healing systems. So, this is about how Indian National Congress and its various leaders uh, they thought about Ayurveda. But this was largely this at the same time. United Provinces Congress Ministry, headed by G.V. Pant, um, when he came at the helm of the government, issue of indigenous medicine gained momentum. Why? Because health was the subject which appeared in the state list, and hence the Congress ministries wielded effective powers in matters related to public health and in patronizing healing systems. In the light of this, being basically a populist government, the Congress ministry in United Provinces took several decisions which favored the Ayurvedic practitioners and Ayurvedic pharmacies over Western healing of system. As I said, that Govind Ballabh Pant was quite a pragmatic person. And one major decision he took was to open Aushadhalayas, that is the dispensaries imparting Ayurvedic healing, and dawakhanas, that is dispensaries imparting Unani medicine throughout the province. So he decided to open these osdales and dawakhanas. But as was the case with many other decisions of the Congress ministries, um, it brought further challenges, because I just cite one very interesting example. When Govind Ballabh Pant decided to open Ausdhalas and Dawakhanas, then one major question was that what should be the numbers? How many Ausdhalas should be opened and how many Dawakhanas should be opened? And here the Congress ministry resolved that it should be in ratio of the Hindu and Muslim population. So uh, the government, which was headed by the Indian National Congress, that also associated healing systems with the religious affiliation of the population. So, and I'll discuss this further. That from 1920s, communalization of healing practices also took place, and this decision by the Congress government in 1937-38, it further intensified that process. Now, coming to an interesting aspect, that how this Ayurvedic movement was carried, or how this entire Ayurvedic discourse for revivalism was created. And here I talked about uh, three major points, three major ways through which this Ayurvedic discourse was created. One was print, If you the very first one is print, because if you see the particular case of United Provinces, then as many as 30 journals in Hindi devoted to Ayurveda and other health related issues came from different parts of the provinces. And these what is interesting is that these journals were not just uh, coming from the major cities like Lucknow or Allahabad or Varanasi, but from very small towns, from Meerut, from Kanpur, from Itawa. So from various smaller towns also, these Ayurvedic journals started appearing in the first half of 20th century. In fact, there was an entire series of Vadcom editors. If when I talk about these Vadcom editors, they were professional Vads who were also at the same time bringing out journals. At the same time, there were printing press who were getting more and more interested in publishing Ayurvedic texts. And here I can cite the example of Naval Kishore Press of Lucknow, or Ganga Granthagar of Lucknow, or Sudhanidhi Press of Allahabad. So they started printing a lot, publishing a lot of Ayurvedic texts. So print was one major way through which this entire public discourse on Ayurveda was created, and or to promote the cause of Ayurveda and its revival. Then the other way was through organization. And here I would like to bring into one major organization which was devoted to the cause of Ayurveda was All India Vaidya Sammelan. Established in 1907, All India Vaidya Sammelan was exclusively devoted to the cause of Ayurvedic revivalism, and it actually became a sole spokesperson. It claimed the status of being the sole spokesperson of Hindu Ved interests. It had various units in different provinces of the country. So, besides All India Ved Sammelan, which was the apex body, there were different provincial units. For example, United Provinces Vedya Sammelan, or Madhya Prant Vedya Sammelan, or Maharashtra Vaidya Sammelan. So different provincial units were also there working under it. So it was an organized movement, and many Vads were actually they used to take membership of this organization. It used to hold annual meetings, and then after the annual meets, it would publish the proceedings of the conference. Also, All India Ved Sammelan used to bring its mouthpiece journal, which was titled as Ved Sammelan Patrika. So it was through organizational efforts also that Ayurvedic discourse was created during this time. Then the third major way was through mobilization. Attempts were made to mobilize Veds through various interesting ways. And one very interesting way was the celebration of Dhanvantari Mahotsav. If you look at the period prior to 20th century, then definitely there are references of Dhanvantari, particularly if there are references of this mythical churning of the celestial ocean, out of which Dhanvantari appeared with nectar in his hand, and then how he, this Amrit Kalash or nectar, how he gave the nectar to the gods and making them immortal and warding off all kinds of diseases. So we have references of Dhanvantari in our epics and in the ancient texts, but Dhanvantari was never deemed as the god of Ayurvedic practitioners. But in 20th century, suddenly we see deification of Dhanvantari, not just deification, but also Dhanvantari Mahotsav. uh, it began to be celebrated just before Diwali on the occasion of Dhanteras, and that became one major activity through which Vads were mobilized. And in if I can invoke the terminology of Eric Hobsbawm and Terence Ranger, then it became the classic case of quote unquote invention of tradition, this celebration of Dhanvantari Mahotsav. So, through these ways, attempts were made to homogenize the ideas within Ayurveda. As I said, a lot of fluidity were there, and that was problematic for the colonial state. Colonial state always alleged that there is no unanimous thought within Ayurveda. So how can it be deemed as a system? So through these attempts, actually homogenization was aspired. But despite all these differences of opinions, continued to exist, and debates and discussions over medical issues uh, and Ayurveda came on public forum, whether in print or annual meetings or festive celebrations. But this was in itself a fundamental change in traditional Indian medical discourse, which was hitherto restricted to the families of practitioners. If you see the time period before 20th century, then the discussion around Ayurveda was limited to very few families. But with this Ayurvedic revivalist movement of late 19th and early 20th century, discussions came on public forum, and various people suddenly started contributing to it. You need not to have a professional web to advocate the cause of Ayurveda. So various vets, they were through these Ayurvedic journals and through these annual conferences, they were discussing and exchanging the ideas of healing. So this dispersal of Ayurvedic knowledge and related discourse was one of the key features of the period under discussion. Now, coming to the social culture of late colonial Ayurvedic discourse, as I said, that Ayurvedic revivalism was not just a medical movement. A lot of socio-political manifestations were included in it. We just discussed. I just discussed about the political manifestation, that how the politics of Congress and various the nationalist politics was involved behind creating this Ayurvedic revivalism. Now, coming to the social culture of this Ayurvedic discourse, a careful analysis of the early 20th century Ayurvedic discourse reveals that it was not just about the healing aspect of Ayurveda, rather, it enthusiastically engaged with many of the contemporaneous socio political debates. So, if you read these Ayurvedic tracts and conference proceedings that I just discussed, and they were published during 20th century, one can sense that this engagement sometimes was very explicitly, and on other occasions you can find implicit engagement. In other words, the Ayurvedic discourse of the time contains within itself varied social manifestations. Now, incidentally, such explicit and implicit social manifestations, as reflected by the late colonial Ayurvedic discourse, on occasions was highly casteist, communal, gender, and class biased in its colorings. So, I'm not saying that all sorts of Ayurvedic writings which took place during this period was contained socio-political manifestations. No, not all kinds of Ayurvedic writings, but a significant chunk of that at the same time carried these socio-political manifestations. And if you analyze these social manifestations, then you can clearly sense a sort of caste, community oriented, or gender or class based colorings or class based prejudices in this discourse. For example, if you look at the caste and class prejudices in the late colonial Ayurvedic discourse, then the Ayurvedic discourse of the period under discussion often appeared highly casteist and reflected upper class biases, because there are several texts, Ayurvedic texts, and where they directly attack the lower caste and class for their unclean habits, and they were held responsible for the spread of many of the diseases in contemporaneous Ayurvedic notions. So, it was not just the lower caste, but also class angle needs to be looked into this entire discussion on the prejudices when we talk about the social prejudices of the Ayurvedic discourse of the time. Um, there is a caricature where you can see that how servant is being blamed for deliberately spreading the skin disease to his master. So there the class angle is involved, not just the caste angle, because the servant from the caricaturing, he appears from an upper caste, and so there the class angle comes into. Then if you look at the Ayurvedic tracts on child care, then there were which were termed under the broader bracket of Santati Shastra. Then there is a text titled as Susantati Shastra, which stated the need to encourage couples to give birth to Desodharak Veer, Sudharm Pracharak Mahant, या साधु, विद्वान ब्राह्मण, वीर क्षत्रिय, दानी वैश्य, सेवाभावी शूद्र, एक पत्नी व्रतधारी पुरुष और पतिव्रता स्त्रियां. So I just translated it: liberator of the nation, disseminator of the religion, scholarly Brahmin, brave Kshatriya, generous Vaishya, duty bound or attending Shudra, monogamous men, and chaste or faithful women. So how the popular this dominant social discourse of the time reflected even in the child care tracts of or Santati Shastra, which were written during this time. Also, Hinduization or Brahminization of Ayurvedic treatment also took place during this time. I just give you a quick example. Treatment of snake bites prior to 20th century was the domain of subaltern healers. When I'm talking about subaltern healers, then the lower caste healers. But what happened during this time that many of these subaltern healers or low caste practitioners, they were attacked, and it was argued that they don't follow the line of Ayurveda. Uh, but at the same time, the upper caste Ayurvedic practitioners, they learned these techniques of snake bite treatment. They added some Sanskritic chants to that, and then the prescribed texts were written. So a kind of ritual hijacking of subaltern therapeutics was also there. So the technique was same, but it was added with Sanskritic chants and all, and then it was argued that now it is proper Ayurveda. So how it was a kind of ritual hijacking. So besides this caste and class biases, gender biases were also very much there. Ayurvedic tracts often carried didactic tone, advising women how to conduct themselves in the social sphere. Also, if you look at the Ayurvedic tracts on child care, then the exclusive focus was on male child. So, proper upbringing of male child was the exclusive focus, and proper upbringing of female child was never an issue with the Ayurvedic child care tracts. In fact, female health became important for Ayurvedic child care tracts only when the girl child attains the age of adolescence, because then they have the reproductive role to play, and that's where the Ayurvedic tracts started engaging the issues of women. Also, if many of the Ayurvedic tracts of the time carried theme of manmani or manchahi santan, or the desired child. Needless to say that this desired child was always a male child. Also, if you look at the entire movement of professionalization of dyes during this time, or midwives during this time, which has been worked upon by many scholars from Supriya Guha to Geraldine Forbes and all. So if you look at the professionalization of dyes, then also Ayurvedic practitioners started favoring this entire movement, and this entire process of professionalization of dyes, which was because this was one demand which was raised by the colonial state, that Indian midwives should be professionalized. They should be they should learn the professional ways of doing the things. But when the colonial state was are talking of professionalization of dyes, they wanted to train the same lower caste dyes. But if you look at the Ayurvedic discourse of the time, then they were saying that the upper caste families, or particularly widows from upper caste, they should come into this profession. So an idea to replacing these lowly dyes or low caste dyes was also there at the same time. So this gender, besides this gender biases, there were communal aspects also. uh, in this late colonial Ayurvedic discourse. And All India Ved Sammelan had a prominent role to play in it. Just a second. So the Sammelan often claimed itself to be the sole spokesperson of the quote unquote Hindu Ved interest, and stressed that the concerns and interests of the Hindu Veds were different from the Muslim Hakims. Also, it overwhelmingly used the popular templates of Hindu communal consciousness like Aryan heritage, ancient Hindu Sanskrit based learning of the sages and their sacred writings, also Hindu science. So these things frequently appeared in the Ayurvedic discourse of the time, and also issues like Hindi prachar, cow protection, and the cause of Hindu education often formed the subject of Ved campaign. I'll just give you a very interesting example that many Veds favored this cow protection movement, which actually took place in first half of 20th century. Various movements were carried on it. So milk is an important ingredient in many of the Ayurvedic remedies. But Veds of this time, they argued that it is not just milk but cow milk, and also not just cow milk, but it was argued that different colors of cow, they produce different kind of milks with different medicinal properties. So they actually provided a kind of scientific validity to this entire cow protection movement. Also, typical argument of Hindu communal consciousness, which perceived all kinds of decline, including that of Ayurveda, being set in the medieval period, and Aurangzeb became a punching bag for most of the Ayurvedic practitioners of the time, and they actually traced the decline of Ayurveda from the reign of Aurangzeb, and or even before that, from the onset of the quote unquote Muslim rule in India. Ayurvedic texts openly all attacked also the Muslim rule of the past for uncontrolled and perverted sexual behavior, leading to manifold diseases. And also, if as I discussed the Dhanvantari Mahotsav, that how a sacred aura was also created um, for to promote the cause of Ayurvedic revivalism. Then, an important theme to discuss is to look at the Ayurveda in the market or economic underpinnings of late colonial Ayurvedic movement. Dynamics of the market, both when I'm talking about market, it is print as well as drug market. So, dynamics of the market considerably shaped the late colonial Ayurvedic movement in multiple ways. In fact, the kind of socio-political manifestations which we see in the late colonial Ayurvedic discourse had an economic logic as well, besides being merely social and political. If you look at the late colonial Ayurvedic movement in India, then it very tactfully used as well as succumbed to the market forces to fight back the growing influence of Western system of healing. And this interactive relationship shared between the Ayurvedic movement and the market forces eventually laid down some of the characteristic features of Ayurvedic pharmacies and drug manufacturing in India. It is noticeable that the new Veds of the early 20th century India particularly focused on those aspects of the medical market which were either spared or overlooked by the practitioners of Western medicine. So here you need to remember one thing, that prior to 20th century, these healing systems used to receive patronage from royal houses, but with the princely states on the decline, or with the colonial states establishing its root on Indian soil, this patronage system suddenly collapsed. And also many of the princes of the princely state, they, in order to be in the good book of the colonial rulers, they started promoting Western medicine. So this The patronage system shrinked during 20th century, during late 19th and 20th century. And then Ayurveda had no other resort but to seek the support from the market, from of the common masses. And when they were going into market, then it was all about competition, the economic competition with the Western medicine. And that's why they suddenly started focusing on those aspects of medical market which were either spared or overlooked by the practitioners of Western medicine. For example, production of tonics or production of vitalizers or manufacturing of all encompassing drugs such as panacea, which was in United Provinces, it was known as Ramban Aushadhis. So manufacturing of panacea or even aphrodisiacs. So this was the trend which was set up in early 20th century, continues till this date. If you look at the Ayurvedic pharmacies, then most of them are actually focusing on these areas instead of producing drugs which are specific to a particular disease. These new vets actually were very well aware of the fact that Ayurvedic movement could not sustain itself without proving its market potential and utility for the masses. That is why they often resorted to techniques which were alien to the classical system of Ayurveda in order to meet the demands of the consumer market. So, this consumer market, as I said, became significant for Ayurvedic practitioners of the time. Because if you look at the classical Ayurveda, then there the identity of doctor or then the I or the and the identity of the drug manufacturer and the identity of a chemist or the person who is selling the drug, all these three identities used to be merged into one person. So the same person will the same person or same vet will do the checkup. He will prepare the medicine and then give you the medicine. So that is a classical system of healing in Ayurveda, because Veds believe that each person and each disease is different. Not just each disease is different, but if the same disease is affecting two different persons, then they will not prescribe any standard kind of therapy. Instead, they will go on case to case basis. So they will treat both the persons differently, affected from the same disease. And that's the classical system. But in 20th century, what we see that all these three identities were separated. So now you have Ved, who is merely looking at the symptoms of the disease. Then there are pharmaceutical companies, the giant Ayurvedic pharmaceutical companies which came up during this time, like Jhandu or Vaidyanath or Dabur or Himalaya. All these giant Ayurvedic pharmaceutical companies came during this time. And so the drug manufacturer is now separate. And then there are Ayurvedic stores who are selling these Ayurvedic drugs. So these three identities, which earlier used to be merged into one person, were now separated under the influence of Western medicine, because Western medicine works like that. So standard pharmacopoeia was also attempted to be developed in Ayurveda, and that was actually the pressure or hegemony of knowledge created by Western medicine. And Ayurveda succumbed to that in order to fight back the influence of Western medicine. And why these things were important? Because Ayurveda was not, as I said earlier, also was not an abstract ideology. It was a healing system producing consumable goods. Hence, it had to create its own market and consumers out of the users, besides the ideological and emotional mobilization of the masses. So, Veds or Ayurvedic practitioners knew that it would not work if they are trying to carry the entire movement simply by saying that a person should adopt Ayurveda because it is indigenous. They knew that it will not go beyond a point, and they need to have the proper consumers of their medicine. And for to create these consumers out of the users, they resorted to various techniques also. For example, as I said, change in the therapeutics, and also through advertisements. In fact, newspapers were full of advertisements of Ayurvedic drugs. And if you look at these advertisements only, then you will get many contents or many ideas which were actually carrying this Ayurvedic revivalism. So also I tried to look at Ayurveda in independent India, or for the first few years in independent India, that what actually happened to this movement, because the fate and place of Ayurveda in the newly independent nation, with particular reference to the United Provinces, was interesting to look, um, because it immediately followed after independence. And also I could try to look at that what changes took place or what continuities were there. And also, this colonial context, which was one major driving force for the Ayurvedic revivalism so far, suddenly disappeared after 1947. And so it was no longer present, this colonial context. And in the absence of this colonial context, the Ayurvedic movement had to face new kinds of challenges, which were internal and non-colonial. This tracing the post-colonial government attitude towards Ayurveda and other indigenous healing practices, which had a lasting imprint on the future development of Ayurveda in independent India, is something which is very interesting, because even in independent India, Ayurveda and Ayurvedic practitioners, they continued to face discrimination. And why this discrimination was there? Because as I said in the very beginning, that in 19th century Western medicine came close to the um, uh, state, or it became an intrinsic part of governmentality. And when India attained its independence, uh, so even the independent Indian nation state carried the legacy of the same governmentality, and it realized that Western medicine is useful to control the subjects. It is more useful than indigenous healing systems, or Ayurveda or Unani. And that's why independent Indian nation states also, besides various commissions and various lip services, they continued relying on Western medicine. I actually, when I talked about these development of Ayurvedic movement in independent Indian nation, uh, or in post-colonial context, then I surveyed three reports. One was the report of the Health Survey and Development Committee of 1947, which is popularly known as Bhor Committee report. Then the other one was the report of the Committee on Indigenous Systems of Medicine, 1948, which is also popularly known as Chopra Committee report, because it was headed by R.N. Chopra, the entire committee which prepared this report. And also in the specific context of United Provinces, the recommendations of the Ayurvedic and Unani Systems Reorganization Committee 1949. So, if you this critical exploration of these reports and various other steps and deliberations and decisions taken by the government of United Provinces for the promotion of indigenous medicine or Ayurveda, leads you to the conclusion that very even after independence, things changed very little for Ayurveda. And there are plenty of examples. For example, uh, suddenly, after independence, Ayurvedic practitioners thought that now it will be the official healing system for independent Indian nation state. But Indian nation state realized that Ayurveda had various problems, because it does not address the public health system, and public health system was something significant for the state, because if there is widespread disease, then it may become a law and order. It may create a law and order situation, and to immediately curtail the spread of diseases, they found Western medicine handy, and that's why they realized that it is effective, or it is strategic enough to continue with Western medicine. So these are the things that these continuities were there even after independence, or India gained its independence. So these are the things that how Ayurveda and its revivalism was directly linked with the nation and also society and also market. And so when we talk about Ayurveda, it should not be dealing with various other uh, driving forces. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, sir. It was really a wonderful lecture. A very a new topic for all of us. Thank you so much, sir. We have some questions. Did the hospitals of Mother Teresa use the treatment, Ayurvedic treatment? Should I repeat the question, sir?
Yes.
Did the hospitals of Mother Teresa use Ayurvedic treatment?
Hmm. Ayurvedic treatment, many hospitals actually, again, the problem is there that uh, many hospitals, they didn't have a separate branch for treatment on the line of indigenous healing system. That is post independence phenomena. Prior to that, there were very few examples. In fact, I cannot remember any example as such where hospitals set up for on the line of Western medicine are carrying the treatment on the line of Ayurveda or Unani.
I have one question, sir. What can be done to revive the value of this Ayurvedic treatment in India? Because modern medicine is taking that place day by day. The importance for Ayurvedic treatment is decreasing. So, what can be done according to you?
See, here I will borrow the ideas of Mahatma Gandhi, because he categorically stated that we need to be proud of indigenous healing systems, but at the same time, healing system is not merely an ideology. It has something to do with pragmatic treatment, and so two things he was always concerned of. One was efficacy. So Ayurvedic practitioners should not compromise with the efficacy of the system. They need to be carried with the same spirit of inquiry, which is the characteristic of Western healing system. So new kinds of researches are required, and also. As Gandhiji always of the opinion that it has to be cost effective, because we all know that how the treatment based on Western medicine is quite expensive, and if Ayurveda is able to provide the cost effective treatment, then it can pose a significant challenge to the entire Western medical, this entire system based on Western medicine. I cannot hear, your mic is switched off.
Yeah, so we have come to the end of the session. It was really a wonderful session, sir. And we want your support and guidance to the History Enthusiast Association in future too. And surely we will do many more collaborations, events together. We hope so. Now I request our core committee member, Ms. Bhargavi Katti, to do the vote of thanks. Over to you, Bhargavi.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Sir, it was great listening to you. I'm here for the vote of thanks. First and foremost, I would like to thank wholeheartedly to Dr. Saurav K. Rai for such an insightful and a beautiful presentation. I was very mesmerized by the way you presented the Ayurvedic movement, and the slides were very clearly, even pictorially, presenting the idea behind the movements and everything. Thank you very much, sir, for such an insightful lecture. Next up, I want to thank Dr. Nandan Shastri, Chairman, Nidhi Katti, the Vice President, Manali Momaya, the president, and the core committee members and the advisory committee members who have joined us, and the ones who have not joined us as well. Last and not the least, I would wholeheartedly like to thank the audience who have joined us today and have been with us for all our sessions. Thank you, everybody. Wish you a very happy weekend.
Thank you. Thanks, Nidhi, and the entire history enthusiast team. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.